Alright guys, so everyone has their ball of clay and you're going to need some tools to help you. So I would suggest, if you don't have tools, to use a fork or to use anything that's kind of got a sharp edge that can help you slip and score your clay. You're also going to need either a spray bottle filled with water or just a little bucket with water so that you can wet your clay when necessary. The first thing you got to do is you got to consider the height of your clay. So you want to have a ruler ready so that you can know the height of your piece. And you again can check the height of that piece by going onto CTLS and looking at that Excel spreadsheet on the class board. So I'm going to make a knight just because that's an easy piece to kind of explain with. And the first thing we want to consider is a base. So for those of you that have the back pieces, that's the bishop, the knight, the king, the queen, or the rook, you're going to want to make a double base. And what that means is you're going to get a nice piece of clay like this, and you're going to want to measure it out and see that it's kind of the right height. And we want about half an inch. So let's do that. Doesn't have to be super exact. You just want them to kind of all add up. So here we go. And we said we wanted the bases to be 2 inches by 2 inches, since the actual chessboard checkered piece that it's going to sit on will be 3 by 3. So that'll fit quite nicely within the checkered board square. So if I get my piece ready like this, then I can see, okay, where's 2 inches? And I can either get my fork, or if I have something that's got an edge like this, I can use this, and I can start to make my 2-inch square. If we look at our horse, the knight, 4.5 inches. So that's how high it needs to be. If I just lay it down there and just to give myself guidance, it's going to help me get the correct height. And if I just put his head on top, and I can see now, if I hold my ruler up to it, what is that height? And I'm already at 3.5, and I want to be all the way up to here, so I can go a little larger. So since I've already got a base that is 2 inches by 2 inches, now if I make another base and just make it a little bit smaller, that'll add a little bit of height. So if I look here, I can do one that's a little bit thinner, so flatten the clay out nicely. Let's go 1.5. Put all my pieces together. Remember, I must add ears and things on top. That's also going to add height. So that's just about right. I'm about at 4 inches, and I want to go to 4.5. So that's pretty good there. See, if I just take this like this and measure, I can see I'm just at 4 inches. Okay, now this is the important step. This piece will not stick to this piece unless we slip and score. And the trick to that is basically you have to get a fork or something sharp, and you crisscross hatch like so all over the chess piece. This acts as the cement to hold your pieces together, and it is very, very important. If you do not do this step, your pieces will fall apart when we fire them. So it is crucial that you remember to slip and score. And the more texture you add, the more it will grip onto the other piece of clay, because clay remembers. So if you make a mark in your clay, the clay remembers that mark. Just like if you have a crack in your clay because your clay got too dry, the clay will remember that crack and it will re-crack in that same place over and over again. So it's also very important that you don't let your clay dry out during your build. And you can see I'm doing a slip and a score on both ends. So this is the scoring part. The slip part is literally just taking a piece of clay and getting it really, really wet. So I'm just dipping it in some water, and that creates a slip. And then you can add that to your piece of clay, and it's like glue, right? And then I can score back on top of that. There's my glue. You can also achieve this by just dabbing your water onto your clay. Then I'm creating a nice vase with moisture so that these pieces don't separate. Now I can come in and add this piece to this piece. And now those pieces should sit nicely together. And remember to seal off the edges where the clay meets. That way you know it'll stick together nicely. So water is definitely your friend when you're working with clay. And don't be too specific in the beginning with structure, because you have to go back and work with it again once you've got what you need. Okay, so there's our base. Now we're going to add the body of the horse, right? And we just got a very simple kind of structure that we've made, and then we're going at the bottom. Okay, so now we have our base done, and now we're going to add our body. And remember to have a little work surface that works nicely for you so that you don't mess up mom's table. Okay, so we're scoring again to the body. Score, 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 turn around, get a nice rough edge. Same with this one. And then we're weighting the area. Make sure it's nice down nicely. And then we're sealing it off. All the time I'm just going back and making sure that my base stays relatively straight. And remember, we can always use the side of our ruler to get those edges nice and straight. Okay, so the body's on pretty well. Another thing to remember is the size that we're at right now is alright for firing, but if we were to go larger, if I were to try and fire this big ball of clay here, I would need to hollow the middle out. Because when a ball of clay is too large and too solid, it can break apart or explode in the kiln. So try, if your pieces are starting to get quite heavy and quite big and fat, you want to hollow out from the bottom. You want to get into that bottom area when this gets a little harder, and make it so that the edges are about this thin on the interior. I think this one still is all right for now. It should fire okay. So now I'm going to add on the head to my horse. And it can be helpful to look up an image of a horse or whatever you're drawing or building so that you know what you're kind of going for when you use your clay. So just remember to slip and score. I'm going in here, I'm slipping and scoring. Any sharp object will work to help you slip and score. Adding some water and putting the head on there. Just sealing off those edges. And now I'm starting to get kind of like a horse. And if I look at my design, it can help me. So remember to refer back to your designs. That's the kind of look I'm going for, right? So I'm putting that in front of me just to look and see, okay, if I do it from the side, I want his head to kind of smooth on this side. And then it kind of rounds out here where his cheekbone is. And because it's not a drawing, because it's three-dimensional, I have to go on the other side and do the same thing. So where am I? Okay, so this side needs to be the same. Round out that jawline. And then his neck gets quite thin right here. And he's kind of leaning down. So now I'm starting to shape my piece. Okay, and then he's got a little snout. So I'm just adding a little bit of chest, a little bit of clay for his snout. And I'm remembering always to slip and score, even for the little pieces. I'm still slipping and scoring. You can slowly see my horses coming together. Another thing you guys need to remember when building these is that you don't want any long pieces like this sticking on top, because then when you bring it in to get fired, it's going to crack off because it's not solid enough. So you want to keep everything quite together and quite solid so that nothing is easily breakable. Because once something breaks with clay and it's dry, it's pretty much done. Like, you can't really fix it unless you try and super glue it. So the way to do it is to just make sure that everything is, number one, slipped and scored, and number two, quite close together and not too many thin dangly pieces. Okay, there goes on one ear. And so obviously this is a thinner piece, so I'm trying to make it as strong as possible so that I don't encounter any breakage. Same with this one, I'm just kind of making a little triangle and remembering to slip and score it. And then I'm turning my clay piece around and I'm putting him on the other side. Okay, so then you can see my piece is starting to come together, and when I reach a point where I'm like, oh no, I have other homework to do, I can't keep working on this, but I don't want it to dry out, you have to cover it really, really well. So you're going to want to get a Ziploc bag or some cling wrap, and you want to put them inside there and make sure that there's no air around your piece. Completely covered in plastic so it stays nice and moist. And if your clay piece is starting to get too dry and you can feel it cracking, you want to spritz it with some water to make sure he stays nice and moist. But you do want it to start to harden up just a little bit so that you can start adding the details, because once it gets a little harder, it's much easier to add the little details. So like now I need to consider, how am I going to do these wings so that they're not sticking out and protruding in a way where they can break easily. So you have to be kind of clever with the way you think about how you're going to add pieces. So if I think about a wing, I think that a wing kind of goes like, let's just play around with it. So if my wing is on the back like this, it's going to go like that, and then like that, right? So we're going to go. There's one wing, and that's going to sit on his back like that. You're going to make it come closer to his body so that it's not sticking out too much. Just remember to slip and score. You must remember to connect on both ends. You see how here I can see the fold. That's not good. I want it to be completely connected. So you can take a spoon or a fork, just make sure that those clay pieces are connecting there. You can also take, this is a very good trick, especially if you're struggling to get to it, is you roll like almost like a little piece of spaghetti with your clay, like this. And you just pop it in like that, and it creates a really nice thick seal between the two pieces. And that's something you would use if you were making like a box, or in this case, connecting a thinner piece of clay. So now my problem is, obviously when this dries, it's going to become very brittle, and this is very likely to fall off. So when I add my second wing, I'm going to connect them so that there will not be any breakage. So here, if I create my second wing, just coming in here again, would have been smart to lay the one on top of the other, and that way I would have gotten an exact replica, but we'll make do. Again, slipping and scoring. You can see I start going in quite rough, and then when I've got the shape that I want, I can go back in and start neatening things up. So now my trick here is going to be, how am I going to make sure that these don't fall off? So I'm thinking the best method is to actually connect them in the middle. Now it's one solid piece of clay instead of two very flimsy pieces of clay. Now I can see that my piece is getting quite thick here. So I'm probably going to have to hollow out my piece when it's a bit more dry. And remember, he's got a mane, and that can kind of help me with having such a thick piece at the wings, because it can just illustrate the mane basically. So I just take this piece like this. And then score it all the way down. And same on where I'm going to place it.
Miss Deborah, could you call the office at 009?
Then I place it down, and now I can attach it nicely. Now the ears also have something holding them together, because the mane is right there. And then we can kind of pinch it to make it a little bit more like a mohawk. Even touching the wings to the mane will give them some security so that they don't break. And then I can even do this, do a little hollow area here. And now I've got two joints, so they can look like wings. This can look like a mane. But I'm making a plan. to make sure these don't fall off. See how you just manipulate clay, and that's why it's so much fun. It's because the more that you get to play with it, the more clever you become with your designs and what you're able to do. And you can just draw to guide yourself as well, so you know here, okay, that's kind of the main, that's his wing, wouldn't see the main there. And there, that's where his hair is. So here's my Pegasus Knight, coming along nicely. You can always carve away again to make it less bulky. You can see here, if you look quite close, you see these little tears in the clay. You want to smooth those out with some water. And don't be impatient with this. Do it in a couple of builds. Don't try and do it all in one day, because I promise you, when the clay gets a little harder after you pack it away for the next time, it's going to be so much easier to put things in, like the eyes and other details that you were thinking about, perhaps the hair on the mane. You can start guiding yourself, but don't be too delicate just yet. Okay, so that's the first part to our build. We must remember now this is quite heavy, so I am going to have to go in the bottom when it's a bit drier and just cut a little circle out here and just decrease the amount of surface area that's filled with clay. We'll try and wait until it's a bit more dry to do it entirely. But see, even doing this is now, you know, it's reducing the amount of surface area that is clay, so it's less likely to explode in the kiln. So that's a pretty good start. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to wrap him up quite tightly in some plastic, and then I'm going to leave him for a little while, and then I'll work on him a little bit more when I have more time. And just remember, obviously, the more you work with it, the bigger that base is getting because it's sitting flat. So I must remember not to let this get too big, because the square that it's going to be sitting in is going to be 3 by 3 inches. So let's pack this guy up. No water, because I want it to dry out just a little bit for my next build. So all I'm doing is I'm taking a piece of plastic. If you have a Publix bag at home, that'll work perfectly. Or some cling wrap, that will work really well. And I'm literally just going around it very delicately and making sure that there's no air in there. And he's wrapped up nice and tightly. And now I'm going to furthermore put this into a Publix bag and tighten that so that no air can get in there. Because the minute that air gets in there, it is going to dry out. Can even take some tape now. Just make sure that he's wrapped nice and tightly. And same with my piece of building clay. You're going to need this, especially those of you that are doing tiles. So you're going to want to wrap this up also very tightly in some plastic. For those of you who are doing tiles, I just wanted to show you, I think perhaps you're a little confused because we haven't really gone over it yet. What you're going to be doing is basically creating the tiles that are going to work as the checkerboard for our chess set. So if each of you makes 2 tiles, we should have about 42 tiles, and we can use 32 of those to create the base. And I'm sure a couple of them will break. So this is a way to know that we can get somewhere. So the best thing to do would be to use a rolling pin here. So let's grab a rolling pin and roll this piece out. Okay, so here I have a little rolling pin. Maybe your mom has one in the kitchen, or you can just use anything that's all the way around and hard, like a glass bottle, and it'll work very well as a rolling pin. Or you can just flatten it by hand and do the best you can. So these have to be 3 by 3 inches. And in terms of height, let's decide on a height so that they're all the same level. Okay. So I'm just going to take my ruler and make sure that I've got 3 by 3. Yep, I got about that now. We don't want to make them too thin because then they're going to be very likely to break. But I don't know if you guys realize, any tiles that you have in your house, they are made like this. They are made by being flattened and being fired and then grouted down onto another surface. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. So you are learning how to make tiles. And if any of you that are not assigned tiles would like to make a tile with your extra clay, you're more than welcome just to practice. And who knows, perhaps it gets used in the end for the chessboard if we have others break. Okay, so that's about the right. Pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to measure. That's 3. That's 3. And that's 3. Perfect little 3 by 3 inch square. Move these pieces away. And we are golden. That's all that you need to do here. And then we can just take our ruler and make sure that everything is nice and square. Check our measurements one last time. We're a bit short on that side. Push it down a bit. Perfect. Pretty good. Obviously, the more you pick it up, it's going to change the dimensions, so try to just be kind of exact with it. Now we must turn it around, make sure that the other side is nice and flat. And now we can spray a little bit of water here, and that'll help us smooth it out. And then if I look at the actual height of my tile, this is what we're going to follow. Okay, so we're at the ruler, the quarter-way point. So I'm going to write down that exact measurement onto that Excel document so that you guys know. That's pretty good. Make this side a little bit flatter. And then we'll grout all your tiles together and we'll have a beautiful chessboard. Hopefully. That's the plan. Don't stress if they break or anything. We will come up with a plan. It's not a perfect science to this, so we just do it as we go. And then I'm going to wrap this guy up. Make sure he stays nice and flat, doesn't curl at the edges. Very gentle. Put him here on my plastic. And then when he becomes a little harder, I can make sure that those measurements are correct before I let it dry out. There we are.